No thanks. I'll free myself.
Wait, I can help you.
Do we yeet Starscream? Vote now in the comments. Hey everyone, have you ever asked yourself, what if everything ever was awesome? What if there were giant robots fighting an eternal battle of good and evil, with swords, on a giant spaceship that is actively exploding? What if you could punch someone in the face with the weight of an entire shopping mall? What if the Dinobots weren't used for comedic relief? If you answered any of these questions with hell yeah, oh man, today is gonna be your day. So, a little less than a year ago, I had to kill a day's worth of time in Jefferson City, Missouri. I had originally planned to get some session planning done for my D&D campaign in a nicer looking Starbucks, but on a whim I stopped into a GameStop because I like to check out what I call the weird corner, which is where they put all the stuff that people brought in from console generations too old to have a section on the shelves, and I hit the jackpot. On top of bagging the latest meme game from Big Man Mandy's videos, they had this baby. We will not be doing this one today, and for one important reason, I need to get good. It was then that I remembered that while the local mall was desperately clinging to life, it had not one, but two sizable used game shops, so I started hunting. I had just figured out that analog capture system from the Alan Wake 2008 games video, and I was excited to find other cool games I could play and make videos about from console generations past. And I did it. I found all three of the Transformers Cybertron games. Yeah, you heard me right, 3. We'll get to that later. But first, I should tell you about what exactly these are. The Transformers Cybertron Trilogy was a series of games made at the start of what's called the Aligned Continuity, and they chronicled the events leading up to the Autobots' exodus to Earth. In a lot of Transformers timelines, someone will exposit to the human characters that before they came to Earth, the Autobots and Decepticons were in a civil war on their homeworld of Cybertron, which has been going on for so long that they started fighting before modern humans were a thing, let alone hominids in general. Unfortunately, this means that we are to the Transformers what the Tau are to the Imperium of Man. Don't get too sad about it. That's okay though, because now we get to play through the fabled war in all of its catastrophic, oil-splattering glory. Transformers lore is very complicated, and the TF Wiki is one of the few places on the internet with bigger, more complex pages than the 40K Wiki. Don't believe me? This right here is the page for Megatron. G1 Megatron. There are 6 other Megatrons that need to be summarized. Also, whoever is in charge of doing the captions on the TF Wiki, you are doing a great job in brightening my day. Thank you. But where were we? Right, continuity. Yeah, there's a lot of it, and frankly, you shouldn't think too hard about what is and is not interacting with this, and just try to have a good time. Continuity can be whatever we want it to be now that we retcon the one Unicron rule. Hell, I consider it canon that in all universes, RC can pull off an absolute barn burner of Heart's Barracuda, as I've seen it live with my own eyes and ears when she and Hot Rod from the Cybertronic Spree came onto the stage during the Proto Man set this year at MagFest. God, I love MagFest. Alright, so I also had a whole segment here called What Bullshit I Had to Do to Record This Game Part 2, which was a continuation from the Alone in the Dark video, but we've dawdled long enough, so I'm gonna give you the short version of it. I did try getting an HDMI splitter, like many of you have suggested, but not only did that not work, but there was also a terrible flickering on the footage I recorded. I fixed this by just getting rid of the splitter, using the analog bypass trick I was using before, and then getting some really long HDMI cables to let me plug the capture card directly into my PC from my office TV. There's still an occasional flicker on the screen, so if you see something, don't worry, that's not your machine dying on you. It's just that I'm doing a rather elaborate way to get all this around the copy protection. And now, while I normally try not to shill too much, I'm just gonna remind y'all that these videos do sometimes take a very long time and cost me a good bit of money finding setups to get all this stuff found and recordable. And I do run a Patreon over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder. It is never mandatory. These videos will always be here on YouTube, but anything you can kick my way is always greatly appreciated. Thank you. Now let's go punch some Decepticons. Welcome to Transformers War for Cybertron, released in 2010 by High Moon Studios. This was the polar opposite of the previous year's Revenge of the Fallen movie, because everything about it is awesome. There are no human characters to babysit and explain things to, no goofy and out-of-place comic relief characters, and instead the humor is given to us through the solid, wholesome Decepticon banter. There is camp, glorious camp. If it was any hammier, it would take place in the pork dimension. The rule of cool usurps the rule of nature here. The game's intro cinematic alternates between Optimus Prime and Megatron narrating the events of the eons-long war that's about to come to a climax, and everybody cool is here. This was the best thing for Transformers since Newgrounds did Blamformers. Now, before we get into how the game actually plays, I'm gonna preface this discussion with how this game is dated, because, well, it's nearly 15 years old now. I've seen a lot of folks gassing this game up lately, trying to milk the hype of a potential remake, which, yes, we'll talk about that later, and my own take on what's going on. But for now, I'm just gonna remind everyone that this game came out during the middle part of the PlayStation 3's life cycle. Expect a lot of muted color palettes, a lot of hiding around corners while waiting for your HP to regenerate, and turret segments, because those were the style at the time. Transformers War for Cybertron has 10 levels, 5 Autobot, 5 Decepticon, which in turn shakes out to 3 traditional levels, a flyer level, and a boss battle at the end of each campaign. These campaigns take place one right after the other, a Lost Starcraft, which I make that comparison because if you really want to, you can straight up skip the Decepticon campaign and play the Autobot one if for some reason you wanted to do that despite all the best banter being in the Decepticon campaign. There's no progression between missions or persistent upgrades across the campaign or even any of the factioned individual levels. Each mission can be dropped into out of order once you complete the previous missions, which ended up helping me a lot since having that issue with my capture system I mentioned earlier caused a ton of screen flickering, and I ended up needing to replay the entire Decepticon campaign. That being said, there isn't much reason to revisit levels unless you want to try them on another difficulty or play as another class. There's also some secret hunting, but that boils down to shoot the hidden thing that's slightly off the critical path. So since we are in an extremely 2010 game, as this is literally coming out in 2010, of course there's going to be obligatory classes that don't really mean all that much, and I think that High Moon knew better than to make the classes play too differently from each other, as who the hell is going to want to play as anyone other than Megatron? Like, I can see wanting to play as maybe Bumblebee or Ironhide, like if they're your favorites instead of Optimus Prime, but given the choice between like Megatron and 2 other guys in the Decepticon campaign, I'm not taking a lot of time to decide like who I'm playing as. Just for due diligence, I did play as Barricade on the first level of a second playthrough just for a bit to see how it runs, and yeah, it's not all that different. Barricade just plays like a lame version of Megatron who does not get the gun. War for Cybertron follows the 2-weapon rule because again, it was the style at the time. Not a lot of these are very memorable, and the ones that are hardly let you play around with them for some reason. The only weapons I really felt fond of were Optimus Prime's default weapon, which is the assault rifle but better, Megatron's gun, and then the double-barrel shotgun equivalent, because what's cooler than being a 30-foot tall robot? The answer? Being a 30-foot tall robot who turns his enemies into metal wallpaper and then does a sick flip with his boomstick. The Scrapmaker is okay too, I guess, but that's just your typical minigun. I gotta be honest, part of the reason why I'm not particularly fond of any of these guns is because they're mostly just a bunch of gray rectangles slapped together with not very many unique characteristics. We are still clawing our way out of the everything is brown, gray, or washed out era of gaming aesthetics in 2010. There are also turret segments, which are exactly what you'd expect them to be, and I'm willing to give it a little bit of a pass here because for one, you transform into the turret, which is pretty cool, and what's even cooler is you can rip the turret right off its fixture so that you can become the master of gun. And even better is that some of your NPC squad mates can heal you as you go, meaning if you take the turret and get healed, you can achieve
Pootus.
Oh yeah, and you can transform into a vehicle too. You can kill stuff that way. All vehicle modes have weapons, but not all weapons in vehicle mode are created equal. There's the tank modes, and then there is everyone else. Most vehicle forms are, okay for fighting, but in most cases, you're not going to be transforming in the middle of a fight unless you are out of ammo. You can transform for 2 reasons. 1, it looks cool. Your player character does a sick flip that almost makes me forgive it that they just sort of morph into the vehicle mode without actually changing into the robot or the vehicle or vice versa. And I for one can tell you that the figurines associated with this series are exceptionally complicated because of that. The other reason is that most levels will have a segment where you gotta drive long distances or quickly dodge things. They're okay really, but the reason I don't mind them is because you get sick banter while you're driving to the next area. The major exception to this vehicle mode rule is the flyer missions, which are more on the lines of big vehicle segments with occasional forays into robot mode. It's cool though because you get infinite ammo on your weapons and heat-seeking missiles. The one last thing I want to talk about gameplay-wise is the health mechanic. The way War for Cybertron does health puts a huge damper on things and will often kill any momentum you had in a level. It kind of works like the original Halo game's health system, except way worse. You get 4 ticks of health, which will regenerate up to the point of your last tick. So say if at some point you had 2 full ticks of health and half of your third one, after a few seconds of not getting shot at, the third one would refill, but you would not get the fourth one back. I'd almost be okay with this, except for the key detail is that a lot of the times, you're gonna be in situations where most of your HP pool is gonna get instantly mulched, as I think it also does a thing where if a certain amount of damage would have been enough to kill you inside of a second, the game instead lets you live with the smallest sliver of health to prevent you from dying a lot and having to reload, because remember, these games are all operating off an HDD. Loading takes a while, and that means there is a lot of getting stuck on 1 tick of health and having to turtle your way through a level until you find the next cube of energon, which will replenish your health all the way. And unfortunately, Transformers don't get drunk after consuming large amounts of energon in this continuity. The one workaround to this is that once or maybe twice a level, you can find an extra shield, which acts as a large, singular health bar on top of the 4 ticks of health you get. I really wish there were more of these because when I had them, the levels played a lot smoother since I wasn't having to constantly run back and hide behind a wall or something when I took any damage so I would not lose a full tick of health. Okay, so as a game, War for Cybertron is a little bit above mediocre, and that's me being nice. Where War for Cybertron really shines is the sheer spectacle of everything. Everything is sized up for Transformers, and in turn everything is freaking huge. All fights are swarming with guys and everyone is shooting in all directions all at once. Using your melee to take down an enemy coats your screen in what I think is liquid energon, but it's pretty metal. Most levels end with huge explosions or with piles of scrap that were once the opposing army. Half the time your path through a level involves blowing something up or something that gets blown up in the process of trying to kill you. This is not just Transformers as it should be, but yet again, the style of the time. Uncharted was still the king of PlayStation at the time, and spectacle games were extremely in vogue. Uncharted 2 came out the year before this released, and we were collectively pushing the limits of how crazy a set piece we could put in a video game before it just became a slightly interactive movie. But what makes this unique is that these are Transformers we're following here, and if it's one thing that's been fairly consistent about the Transformers in between iterations is that given the opportunity, we're gonna hear some solid back and forth between them. The Autobots are pretty good, but the Decepticon banter is what makes this game. Megatron is 100% him every second that he is on your screen, and for the level that you're playing as the Seekers, Skywarp, Thundercracker, and Starscream are hilarious.
Unbelievable! These Autobots are dumber than Skywarp!
Perhaps, Starscream. But have you considered an escape route for us?
Try the upper deck! Hurry!
They sealed it off!
Now's our chance! Fly through the hole!
Dumber than Skywarp? I'll show you, dumb Starscream!
You always do.
You know, I think it's easier if I just explain this within a abridged summary of the plot. Spoilers for something that you may or may not ever be able to play anyway. The game starts with telling us that Cybertron has been in a civil war for millions of years now, with no side being able to make any meaningful gains on the other. Then we see Megatron flying a spaceship right through an active combat zone with no regard for anything but getting to an orbital installation. Some guy has the gall to try and tell Megatron that they're about to die in 2 seconds, so Megatron shoots him in the fucking head to save that dude some time, and then crashes the ship into the tower because the door was locked. Some slippery little guy calling himself Starscream comes onto the comms and is like, first off, who do you think you are? Secondly, this is where we keep the dark energon. What the hell are you doing? To which Megatron reminds everyone listening that he is him and proceeds to give all the prisoners that Soundwave took a stern talking to with this neat gun he found. Megatron et al. Storm through the tower, turning all of Starscream's security into paperweights before making it to where the dark energon is being held, which forces Starscream to come out and be like, bruh, that shit will literally kill you. To which Megatron ignores him because he's him and cannonballs right into the core of the Dark Energon, taking control of it. Don't ask questions, just get hype. Starscream swears fealty on the spot, which is, not exactly worth a whole lot, but okay. So Megatron's first order to his new second-in-command is to get the fuck out of his sight. Starscream goes off and does some shit that ends with him and the Seeker shooting the planet into submission, and now Megatron has access to all the Dark Energon he could possibly need, so he just starts bombing the shit out of Cybertron's capital, Iacon. The war's already been pretty intense, but now that Megatron's got all his dudes hopped up on Dark Energon, things are getting pretty bad. Zeta Prime has to show up, and he gives an address to the Autobots in the city that things are pretty bad right now, and he pleads with Megatron publicly to please stop shooting people in the face. Megatron is offended that anyone would ever tell him what to do, so he calls in an airstrike on his own position to level all the defenses between him and Zeta Prime. Zeta has something called the Omega Key, which here serves as a means to access the very core of Cybertron. Shooting people in the face with his giant arm cannon has worked pretty well up until this point for Megatron, so he decides that shooting Zeta Prime in the face is probably the solution to this too. Sure enough, that gets him the Omega Key. But little does he know that the Omega Key also acts as a beacon for Omega Supreme, the biggest shit brickhouse in the Autobot army, who takes the activation of the Omega Key as it's time for him to come down to Cybertron and show the Decepticons the power of friendship and incredible violence. Megatron takes one look at Omega Supreme and goes, holy shit, that guy's strong. Let's murder him and take all his power for ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean specifically and exclusively me. And after a few false starts on this, as Omega Supreme is strong enough to rearrange the local landscape every time he transforms out of vehicle mode, the Decepticons lure him to a spot where they can taint the ports he recharges from with Dark Energon, which causes Omega Supreme to have a little nappy nap where they can surgically disassemble him. Megatron takes the part of Omega Supreme that lets him access the core of Cybertron and infects the whole planet with Dark Energon, allowing him to do as he sees fit. Shortly after this, a scout named Bumblebee nearly gets scrapped before Optimus, not yet a Prime but not Orion Pax either, shows up and uses his vehicle form to shift-delete the sparks of several Decepticons. Bumblebee explains that shit's fucked right now and Zeta Prime is probably dead. This upsets Optimus greatly, who goes and punches Starscream in the face a bit to feel better about things. Optimus smacks Starscream so hard that it fixes the Wi-Fi, and the Autobots can communicate again. Turns out Zeta's not dead, he's just in prison. Optimus, Bumblebee, and Sideswipe allow themselves to get captured by Decepticons so they can stage a breakout at the Kaon prison, because you can take away Optimus Prime's guns, but you can't take away the giant axe that he can will into existence, which is capable of cutting through anything the plot needs it to cut through. They go to the room with Megatron's face in it, where Optimus and Megatron have some words for a second, before Optimus gets bored and decides to make the prison the site of Cybertron's first Waffle House by beating up the Midicons in front of Soundwave. Soundwave is so mortified by this that he disables the prison security just to get Optimus Prime to leave. Optimus then goes to where they're keeping Zeta Prime, and Zeta Prime is alive, but he tells Optimus that he's actually dead now. Optimus believes him and takes his body to the Council of Dudes, and they're like, okay, I guess you're the new Prime now, don't blow this, kid. Now that he's a Prime, Optimus Prime decides that it should be his first order of business to go and fix whatever Megatron did to the core of Cybertron. And the best place to start with that would probably be to go and get Omega Supreme back. Optimus assembles an elite kill team consisting of him, the only Autobot tanker, and Joshua Graham. Primus can't do all the work himself, so we violence our way through to where they're holding Omega Supreme, and once he's back together, he opens the gate to the core for us. It's here we meet the most important character of this game, Slugfriend. The Autobots ride Slugfriend down to the core of the planet, where Cybertron itself tells Optimus that it's too borked with Dark Energon to function, so it's gonna need to reboot. Cybertron's an old machine though, running off some really slow HDDs, so this is gonna take literally millions of years. In the meantime, Optimus is going to have to call for a mass evacuation of Cybertron, as it will no longer be capable of sustaining any life. Megatron hears about the evacuation order and does not like this. Shooting people in their heads has worked for Megatron every step of the way so far, so he ups his shooting people in the head game by activating the Ultra Gun, which is his giant orbital laser that can shift-delete entire city blocks. It's now up to Jetfire, who's just sort of been here for the entire game, to fly up there and break the thing. Yeah, it turns out that the Ultra Gun is actually a living transformer that listens to Megatron, and Megatron makes fun of Jetfire and his friends in space for thinking that they could just cut the power to this thing like he didn't make a backup for specifically that. They panic and think the next best thing to do is to break the Ultra Gun's transformation cog, forcing him out of orbital laser mode. that works, but now Trypticon is in Mechagodzilla mode, and he's using his jet boosters to slam into Iacon with enough force to turn half of Cybertron into a parking lot. This doesn't work, but now Optimus Prime et al. Have to deal with Trypticon, a boss fight so hard and frustrating because of how everything he does one-shots you if you stand still for more than a second, combined with how you will get stuck on every last part of this level's terrain, forced me to take the easy option and finish the game on easy. The game ends with Optimus Prime narrating the start of what's left of the Autobots scraping together whatever they can find to build the Ark. We knew there was going to be a sequel to this. My only real complaint about the story is that it actually has something to do with some gameplay elements. This could have been peak Megatron, but his arm cannon is kind of anemic. Like, yeah, it fires a cool laser blast, but instead of annihilating anything that has the misfortune of being near the projectile when it hits its target, it takes 2 or sometimes 3 direct hits to kill anything with it. And on top of that, despite the big explosion this thing does on impact, there is next to no splash damage. And when you pair that with how slow the projectile is and how little ammo you get in your pool, the weapon's just kind of lame. And finally, for War of Cybertron, yes, it had a tacked on multiplayer because that was the style at the time, and it includes multiplayer exclusive characters, and on top of that, version specific characters. I can't access any of that though, because in order to access multiplayer, you gotta go online, and the servers of this game are sunset in 2020. Yes, I know there are fan servers, but that does not help me much on my old PS3. I can see the models of like Grimlock and RC in the credits montage, but I have no way of really telling you anything about it beyond that. Sorry. To make up for the lack of multiplayer, we're gonna do something extra nice for the cooking segment. My emergency chicken parm heroes. I first made this recipe after learning that I was going to have quite a few unexpected guests for Christmas, and even after discussing what we cooked for them, I had to throw all of those plans out the window as it was literally Christmas Eve and even the gas stations were closed, never mind a supermarket. I ended up making these using what staple items I had in my home at the time, and they turned out pretty damn good. That's enough food lore though, let's actually cook this. Okay, first order of business is to get the rolls ready for the sandwiches. If you want some more detailed instructions on how I make bread, I did a full tutorial back in the Bendy and the Dark Revival video, but for now I'll say it's just good practice to have flour, yeast, and sugar handy for breaking bread, as those are all shelf-stable items. I personally buy the 50-pound bags of flour from Costco, and even after baking 1 loaf a week, I go through that flour before it goes bad just fine. On a more relevant note, we want something with middling moisture. Let's say a cumulative 3 cups and change or so to 7 cups of flour, which will yield us 8 hefty-sized rolls. Get your dough mixed, and then, while it's doing its first rise, we're gonna thaw and salt the chicken. Having frozen chicken breast in the freezer handy for whatever you need is another just general good practice. Just having a protein that's ready to go if you're willing to run it under some cold water for a bit to thaw it quickly can get you out of some really tight spots. For this demonstration here, I got some fresh chicken since I had the luxury of being able to go to the store, but it's the same process once it's all thawed out. We're gonna lightly salt both sides of the chicken breast and then leave it in the fridge while everything else is getting ready. Back to that bread though. The way I like to do it for sandwich rolls is to rework the dough until it's nice and smooth again, flatten it out, and then cut it like it was a pizza. Take your 8 pieces of dough, flatten them out, and then fold the dough over itself before rolling it into a gluten tube, kinda like stretching it outward as you go. Let these rise for another 30 minutes and start preheating your oven to 425. Okay, time to dress up the rolls and throw them in the oven. Before we chuck them in, first make sure it is all the way up to temp, and second, score the rolls a few times short ways on each to keep them from rising too high in the oven, and then we're gonna season them up. That's gonna be salt, pepper, oregano, basil, and finally grated Parmesan over the top. Parmesan's great to just have around since it's a fairly dry cheese, so it'll last for a bit in the fridge. Really just having a wedge to grate as you go on whatever you're cooking as a garnish is a good idea, and you can always save the rind for stocks and sauces. Remember to put the Parmesan on last so that it cooks and it will keep everything in place on top of the rolls, and then toss those suckers in the oven. With all 8 rolls distributed onto 2 trays so nobody's too close to each other, this took me 40 minutes at 425 Freedom heat units. But remember that ovens are fickle things that are wildly inconsistent even between the same model. Once they're done, put them on a wire rack to cool for a bit, and then we're gonna start our chicken. We need to make sure there's at least some buffer time for the bread to cool before we cut it open and start putting things on it. In a good sized pan, we're gonna heat some oil on medium high and then put our salted chicken breasts in 2 at a time, cooking 4 minutes on each side until they have a lovely golden and color to them. We're gonna have one breast per sandwich, so keep cooking in pairs until you've got enough for all the sandwiches you need to make. This also buys the bread more time to rest, and on that note, you don't need to cook the bread right on the spot. Heck, cooking bread the morning of is still gonna make for some incredibly fresh bread for your dinner. Back to that chicken though. Once they're all done and have had a few minutes to rest, cut the breast into thin slices, slice your sandwich rolls down the middle, and transfer the chicken to the top of the bottom half of the bread. We are almost in the clear. Now what happens next is we're gonna take another shelf-stable item that's good to just have around, even if it's kind of a shameful thing. A jar of pre-made marinara. I know, not the fanciest stuff, but it's mild for picky eaters like children, and you can just keep it in your pantry for a rainy day when all the stores are closed. Spread 2 serving spoons worth of the sauce over the chicken, and then take a couple slices of provolone and put it on top of that. I personally just like to have provolone in my fridge because it's not too strong tasting, so it goes well with just about any kind of sandwich meat you want to make a sandwich for. By the way, it is totally fine if your chicken is somehow not quite done because it's about to go back in the oven. You didn't turn the oven off, did you? Finally, drizzle the inside of the top half of the sandwich roll with some olive oil and then throw the semi-completed sandwiches into the oven one last time for 10 to 15 minutes. Just enough time to really melt that cheese and crisp up the top half of that bread. Then pull the sandwiches out, put the top halves on, and roll them up in parchment paper before cutting down the middle. These please just about everyone, and they're hearty enough to where there's something that you can consider a feast. Like, geez, it even takes a dude like me a considerable effort to finish a whole sandwich in one sitting. By the way, I'm pretty sure you noticed the stuff on my stove that didn't exactly look like pasta sauce from a jar. Let's do these the good way now that the picky eaters are out of the room. Okay, time to go back in time and do things as if we had access to a store and prep. First order of business is that right as we start the bread on its knead cycle in the stand mixer, we're gonna make some combo butter. Take a stick of butter out of the fridge to soften up and start chopping up your herbs and spices. Wash a sprig of parsley and then run it through a few times with a knife before setting aside in a bowl. Now take a bulb of garlic, separate it with the power of friendship and incredible violence, as watching some of their brethren get launched into space with the sheer force of your fist will keep the other cloves of garlic in line. Smash the individual cloves, peel them, and repeatedly run them through with your knife until they're in little bitty bits. Reserve to a different bowl. Now finely dice a couple of shallots and put them in the same bowl as the garlic. The dough's probably ready for its first rise now, so take care of that, and then heat some olive oil on medium-low and add the garlic and shallots. Once it starts to just sizzle, add a little salt, pepper, dried basil, and oregano. We do not want to cook this for very long or for very hot because garlic burns easy and we just want to get the flavors going. Once it is fragrant, kill the heat and wait a bit for it to cool down. Now take the softened butter and spread it out in a large bowl. Then take a stick of butter from right out of the fridge and cut it up into small pieces. What happens next is that we pour the herbs and oil into the bowl and the butter is going to unsurprisingly melt. Don't worry, we're going to cool it down. Add in half of your chopped parsley and then the little bits of cold butter you chopped up earlier and just start stirring. Keep stirring until the cold butter is dissolved in the mix and the mix is not only cooled down but well emulsified. It's okay if it's still a slurry, this is just going into the fridge for now. Now there's still plenty of time left over in that bread's first rise to start making some real sauce. I previously made sauces with fresh Roma tomatoes, which I learned the hard way is really pricey, and that canned whole tomatoes come pre-skinned and work just fine. If anything, that's another thing I keep in my pantry nowadays is cans of whole peeled tomatoes and tomato paste for fresh pasta sauce for cheaper than the canned stuff is always a plus. We're getting sidetracked here though. Annihilate whatever's left of your garlic and toss it into a large, high-walled saucepan with a hefty splash of oil and your can of tomato paste. Now add 4 cans of whole tomatoes in, juice and all, and use a potato masher to gently smush them into chunky bits. Don't try using your mixing spoon, they'll just squirt everywhere. Now add in the rest of that parsley, salt, pepper, basil, oregano, and finally a good shake of that red stuff and let it come to a very light boil. Give it a good stir, then lower it down to a bare simmer to start reducing. And that is basically it for the sauce. Just give this stuff an occasional stir every now and again whenever you aren't immediately doing anything else. And by the time the sandwiches are coming out of the oven, this stuff is going to be good, thick, and flavorful. Okay, finally time for the modifications to the actual sandwich. So once the bread is baked and cooled, the chicken cooked and cut, take a sec to pull that bowl of now cooled and solidified combo butter out of the fridge, which in hindsight, you can probably do this before or after you spread the stuff on the bread, and come to think of it more so, you should probably do it after. Okay, so after you start spreading your combo butter on the bread, you take the rest of it from the bowl, get some plastic wrap, and you kind of make it into a little large sausage. Now about those sandwiches. Okay, so here's how we do it on hardcore mode. Same oven temp, but this time we've liberally applied combo butter to both sides of the bread. we are not adding anything else onto the top of this bread for now. Instead, we're gonna hold off on the sauce altogether as we want that sauce to cook down as much as possible, and we're gonna lay the chicken down on the parchment paper directly and separately. Layer on the provolone, and then on top of the provolone, we're gonna layer on some sliced mozzarella. Why the sliced mozzarella instead of literally any other kind? I'm not gonna bullshit you, there was just a mix and match buy two sale at the store. Now we throw the separated parts of the sandwich in for 10 to 15 minutes, pull it out to see that we now have garlic bread hoagie rolls, and then we use a metal turner to carefully pull the cheesy chicken off the pan and place it directly on top of the garlic bread. Now, at long last, we're gonna take some of that sauce that we made and ladle it over the cheese while it's still piping hot. Look at this beast! This is a chicken sandwich! Okay, I've had a little too much fun here. Let's see what happens after War for Cybertron. Welcome to the sequel to Transformers War for Cybertron, The Fall of Cybertron. My first heading for this chapter in the script is just holy shit. This game is everything I wanted it to be. It drastically improves on just about every aspect of the game. The Transformer designs go from cool but bogged down in that washed out aesthetic to fucking awesome. And goddamn, there's not a single dull moment in this game. There are bigger, cooler guns that have persistent upgrades. There are artillery strikes. There are Dinobots. Fall of Cybertron picks up pretty much right where War for Cybertron left off. Enough time has passed since the end of the last game that the Autobots have basically finished building the Ark, but they're running into some problems. For one, the Decepticons are right at the door of Autobot City, and they won't stop shooting at the thing. And for another, both sides of the conflict are really starting to feel the effects of Cybertron powering itself down, as the budding Energon crisis in the last game is now in full effect, and there isn't nearly enough Energon laying around to fully fuel up the Ark, let alone keep everybody at full power. Right off the bat, one of the things they've really improved is the pacing between levels, and one of the ways they've done this also solves the question of why would you play as anyone other than Optimus Prime or Megatron? The last game had 10 levels, which was more like 8 levels with 2 boss encounters, and that was in turn like 4 pairs of fairly similar levels for each faction, and then a boss encounter. Fall of Cybertron has 13 levels, which if we're being honest here, is 12 and a prologue/tutorial, but each and every one of these levels is a unique experience. Upon comparing the files between War 4 and Fall of, War for Cybertron is actually a little bit longer, but Fall for Cybertron feels like it has a lot more meat on its bones. Perhaps because a lot of War for Cybertron was hiding around corners waiting for my 1 tick of health to refill, or the literal hour it took bashing my head against the wall in the Trypticon fight. Oh yeah, also they fixed the health system, that's a lot better now. Each of these levels has you playing as a fixed character, or sometimes you'll start the game as one character and then later on you'll switch to someone else. But there's still no choosing who you're gonna play as and no class system in game. This is pretty nice because that means each level can be tailored to the particular Transformer you're playing as. Optimus Prime and Megatron levels are big, action-packed slugfests. Cliff Jumper is a surprisingly well executed and actually fun stealth level. And Starscream's just a little guy, and it's his birthday. And on that note, while some of the Autobot and Decepticon levels have very similar styles to them, like say aside from the big obvious one I just mentioned, both Swindle and Jazz have sections that center around using their grappling hook, but their levels are very different and feel different too. Like how Jazz has a lot of sniper duels and carefully preparing for fights, whereas Swindle's just charging through dudes in a big open fight because he's racing against the clock to take out some big guns. Oh yeah, and there's fucking Grimlock, a whole Grimlock level in fact, and I am unapologetic about the fact that this right here is quite possibly peak Grimlock. And while this might not be peak Megatron, or maybe I'll change my mind about it later, it's still pretty up there. Starscream's pretty good too, but this is a far cry from peak Starscream, which is 100% Armada. And on that note, the designs of the Transformers are just better overall. We're finally out of the everything is washed out era, so everyone has fitting color palettes. And yeah, we're still in the PS3, but we're on 2012 coming up on the end of its life cycle. We're pushing this thing to its limits, and I actually did have a few butt clench moments in the game where I saw some no-no glitches that warned me that my PS3 was giving it all that it had. But it pays off too, because while some Transformers like Optimus Prime are mostly like their previous model, others like Brawl have had a pretty hefty redesign now that the rest of the Combaticons are here. Megatron also gets a pretty cool glow up later in the game. I have seen that there is a PS4 version of this game with really good graphics, and man, I would love to get my hands on it. On that note, the weapons in this game finally have a unique look to them and look like they were something built for a 30 to 50 foot tall robot, not just some guy. die. Look at the new assault rifle compared to the old one. The guns are generally more memorable now because they do cool stuff. The 2-gun rule is still in effect, but now you get one light weapon like the assault rifle and one heavy weapon like this cool laser thing that makes baddies change teams. This also isn't nearly as much of an inconvenience because there are Teletran channels all over the game that let you switch up your weapons at no cost and also automatically refill your health and ammo pools with an upgrade. You can also buy upgrades for your guns at Teletran, which persist across all characters, and each weapon has one special effect that makes it do something pretty cool once you unlock the other things. What's also pretty cool is that if you look closely at the weapons, you'll see that they physically change with the addition of new upgrades, and I always love it when a game does that. One last thing to note on the gameplay here is that the game is pretty intense and you die fast in this one, if you aren't being careful especially. This is less about bad health pool economy though, as this time around the health system is much closer to Halo's in a good way, but also a lot of times you're just being swarmed with dudes. Like those first couple levels as Optimus Prime are essentially a siege on the last holdout of the Autobots. Sure, you get some stuff to help abate that, like a cooldown artillery strike, and also all the characters now have a proper dodge ability that lets them dash from one area to another really fast, and that can be a literal lifesaver when the successors to the Brutes show up with their big stabby claws. Oh, also I forgot to write this down in my script, but I should mention it here. You can now change what shoulder you're aiming over at will, which is really good for using the cover properly. I love this. Okay, whatever. We talked about the gameplay, and with that done, we can now talk about how everything in this game is cranked up to 11. You don't fight Megatron. You summon an ancient titan to punch him in the face with the force of the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. We're not sneaking into the secret sewers of ancient Cybertron. We are going to explode it with enough force that Shockwave feels emotions. There will be combiners. There will be giant flying fuel tankers that we are going to have fights on. There will be Dinobots. Now that I look back, this kind of happened right in that sweet spot after Uncharted 3 and while Call of Duty campaigns were still hype, which more on Call of Duty later. So of course, we're gonna have a cool sword fight on a spaceship, and of course Starscream's stealth kill is just him taping enough C4 to bring down a bank vault door onto some poor schmo's back. And I wouldn't have this any other way. You know what, let's get into that abridged summary of the plot. Same deal as before. So Optimus Prime is having a bit of a day with making sure the Decepticons don't steal the rims off his new arc, but if that wasn't enough, Grimlock and his elite team of dudes who are really good at hurting people have fucked off to Primus knows where. He's got bigger problems though, as the latest Decepticon assault is a doozy. Hell, even Starscream's talking shit openly over the comms. Optimus makes a tough call to divert power away from the arc in order to power up the guns and give the arc a fighting chance to not get exploded. He makes it over there okay to turn on the guns, but things are getting a little weird with the rooms he's in starting to shift around and hey, where did you get this energon from? I'm feeling weird. Turns out that the Autobots unwittingly built their base next to motherfucking Metroplex. This not only turns the tide of battle, but even after Optimus gets jumped by Starscream and the Combaticons, it ends up being the literal decisive blow against the Decepticon assault force, as Metroplex makes it clear that he does not mind boxing outside of his weight class. This is cool and all, but we still gotta find out where the heck Grimlock ran off to. With Megatron flattened into sheet metal, the Decepticons have a tough choice to make. Do we want to put the stupid motherfucker in charge, or do we want to put the scary motherfucker in charge? By the way, I'm sorry if the swearing is a little much in this video, but I assure you this is strategic in nature. I don't want this video to accidentally get designated for YouTube Kids and get all the issues that come with that. This is a big boy channel. A child could not even finish half of that chicken parm hero we made earlier. We don't make chicken nuggies here. Except that one time we did in the Streets of Rogue video, but that was because nuggies were in-universe currency there. Tangent aside, Jazz and Cliffjumper are sent out to the Sea of Rust to investigate the last known signal of Grimlock. And surprise, surprise, look who it is! The scary motherfucker! Shockwave's out here doing Shockwave things, mostly experimenting with his Insecticons and maybe a bit of more sinister stuff on the side. Jazz and Cliffjumper stumble upon this star map that the Ancients made, depicting a solar system way out in the boonies of the galaxy that just so happens to have a wormhole connecting it to Cybertron's system. Also, there's like a shitload of energon out here around this weird tower. Wonder what's up with that. Cliffjumper and Jazz find some signs that Grimlock and his team were out here, but not the team themselves. They'll have to think about that later though, because Shockwave's doing some sort of experiment, and knowing this guy, we should probably stop it. So with all the scary motherfucker stuff abated for now, Jazz calls up Optimus Prime and tells him that they have found a solution to all of their problems except for the one that they specifically went out here to look look for in the first place. The Autobots go rent a truck from the hardware store and drive it over to start getting all that energon loaded up, which they really need right about now. Time to see what the stupid motherfucker was up to. Starscream is planning what is possibly the worst attack in the eons-long history of the Cybertronian Civil War, and this is the Combaticons' problem. The Combaticons are really trying their best, but this plan is just so stupid, Starscream is essentially putting half of the Decepticon army into a kill box. They take out the bridge, rented Cybertronian F-150 doesn't care. They destroy the drivetrain, Cybertronian F-150 decides it can just fly now, it could always do that. The Combaticons combine into Bruticus and steamroll their way through all Autobot defenses to take over the bridge? Well, it turns out Combaticons can't drive stick, and the Cybertronian F-150 hits a telephone pole, spilling half of all that energon they just found. Starscream is upset. Neither of these two guys vying for control are really doing all that good of a job of leading the Decepticons, so Soundwave does the reasonable thing and just puts Megatron back together. He also makes some improvements to Megatron, mainly Dark Energon RGBs, and Megatron goes, "First off, how dare you?" and then goes into the arena to ruin Starscream's coronation. With what little time they have to get things back on track, Megatron organizes an Uno reverse maneuver on the Autobots by breaking into their base and this time around stealing back their big dude. They get to Trypticon and Megatron's just like, "Dude, you actually suck, so I am permanently altering you into my new space yacht." Meanwhile, on Shockwave's research outpost that he built to be just like the weird tower he found in the Sea of Rust, Starscream's just being a silly little guy strapping C4 to people's backs. He eventually finds what Shockwave is doing way out here and oh hey, we know where Grimlock got off to. It turns out that Shockwave has been using Grimlock and friends to do some pretty messed up combat optimization experiments based on strange life forms he found on this planet that the ancients were looking at for some reason. Grimlock has literally had his brain scrambled to divert as much power as possible to his ability to hurt things, and he is sure upset about it. Welcome to peak Grimlock. Grimlock doesn't have a gun. Grimlock doesn't need guns. Teletran is scared of him and won't even turn on in his presence. He has small enemies that can be easily thrown into other enemies. Grimlock has a big ass sword and an insatiable lust for Decepticon blood. Grimlock goes about freeing his bros as violently as possible, learning the secret to transforming into a dinosaur and eating his enemies alive for an instant full HP replenishment. All things considered, Swoop over here is just having a nice time and is happy to be with his bud. Grimlock wrecks Shockwave's entire operation, and right as the big tower is about to blow, the comms come back online, so Grimlock calls Optimus Prime to tell him that he's a punk and that he's gonna go what needs to be done. I guess what needs to be done is getting exploded by the tower. So in light of the Energon shipment plan going completely sideways, Metroplex is just like, screw it, just put some jumper cables on me and get out of here. I guess for being a Titan-like being, sleeping for a few million years must be the equivalent of like catching up on sleep during a long weekend. He wasn't gonna fit on that ship anyway. Now we're back around to where we were in the intro, where we get to play as everyone. And after going through our greatest hits segment of the game, we're given the choice if we want to end the game as Optimus Prime or Megatron. And despite all the cool guns and stuff we've been using through the course of this game, including the one that Megatron just put a hole in Bumblebee with, it is time to fight with swords. Rule of cool, rule of cool, rule of cool. Optimus gives Megatron a good stabbing, but they partied a little too hard, so now everyone is just sort of falling into the wormhole. Then a rendition of You've Got the Touch plays and it rolls credits. If there was ever a way to end it, it was that. So in doing some research for these games, I learned that these are meant to serve as a direct prequel to the Transformers Prime series, and that's pretty cool, I guess. Also, I cannot access multiplayer for these games. One last thing, I'm gonna just say it here. Screw it. This is peak Megatron. He is dastardly. He is ruthless. He is RGBs. They made his gun cool. When Megatron gets rebuilt, Rumble is holding out his arm cannon like the royal scepter it is, and when he fires that thing, anything within 10 feet of impact is dead. On top of all of that, the final upgrade makes the last shot of each magazine explode so big and with so much force that basically any fight is gonna be over in one magazine so long as you don't accidentally panic reload. He also gets a new ability where he just flies up into the air before picking a spot where everything is going to get fucked up and crashing into it. Like, don't get me wrong, Megatron was pretty cool in the last game, but the combination of some generic class-based moveset crap and an anemic arm cannon held him back in War for Cybertron. We don't have these problems in Far Off Cybertron. We have peak Megatron! Alright, it's time for the third game in the series, Rise of the Darkspark. Rise of the Darkspark wasn't made by High Moon, but still has story segments that take place in the War for Cybertron storyline. This makes even less sense because it also flash forwards to the Bayverse Transformers, and I don't think Bayverse and Prime are the same timeline. I think. Like I said in the beginning of this video, Transformers continuity is wild. Now, I said previously that it says the game is like this, and you've probably noticed that I haven't shown any gameplay of Rise of the Darkspark yet. Well, I do have a copy of it. It's just that whatever is on this disc is so evil that my PS3 refuses to run it. I physically checked the disc and it seems fine. I was a little panicked for a second that my PS3 was finally biting the dust, but after popping in Devastation and then a couple other games to install and run, they were fine. So I don't think my PS3 is the problem. I can get as far as the game select menu on the PS3 operating system, but once I say to run it, I get a black screen and a hard lock on my console. I have to straight up disconnect the power, wait a good 10 seconds or so, and then plug it back in to get the thing to boot again. Maybe my PS3 is trying to warn me about this game. Maybe whatever is on this disc is going to sully my experience with the previous two games by its association to them. This is my original family PS3. It's still got my first Skyrim save on it dating to 11/11/11. I first played Bioshock 2 on this PS3. I've been through thick and thin with this old machine, and you know what? If it's trying to stop me from doing something, I trust it. Let's talk about what High Moon was up to while not making this game. So one thing I thought was pretty weird was that while it's not on the High Moon Wikipedia page, according to High Moon's own website, one of the games that they worked on was the official tie-in for Transformers The Last Night, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because Rise of the Darkspark also ties into that movie. Maybe they just had like a minor role in development though. What they were mainly up to during this time was making the Deadpool video game. You know, this has got to be like the last hurrah of like tie-in console games, and this is really good. The gameplay's a lot of fun, and High Moon absolutely nails that Deadpool brand of humor and fourth wall breaking. This was also back when the first Deadpool movie was firmly in that's never gonna happen territory, and even includes a joke in the beginning of the game where some guy named Ryan keeps on trying to add Deadpool as a friend on social media. Remember that this was back when the only depiction of Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool we had was seen in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and the script for the Deadpool movie hadn't been quote-unquote leaked yet. Honestly, I was only expecting to play like 10 or 20 minutes of this game for the sake of collecting footage for this particular part of the video, but I ended up binging through the first 2 levels. This game is a lot of fun, and if you guys are into it, we could do a video on this someday. Like, I wouldn't mind having an on and off series of forbidden games. I say as I wasn't swamped in video ideas already. So you might ask yourself, where is High Moon now? Are they still operating? Well, they aren't defunct. They just got sent to the Call of Duty mines. They don't seem to be languishing or anything. Hell, based on them being in Carlsbad, California, it's pretty hard to be sad about anything if you're living in Carlsbad. Also, on a side note there, if you're into distance running and foot races, the Carlsbad 5000 should be a bucket list race for you. Like, do it once. It's amazing. They seem to be fine helping turn the wheels of the giant machine that is the Call of Duty franchise, and if they're working on anything else, it's probably under NDA. I say the latter part because of what you all probably first thought about at the mention of the Cybertron games is that since last year, people have been talking about them, and a lot of people are citing quote-unquote rumors that the game is totally gonna be just re-released any day now. And I'm not gonna try and lie to you for brownie points, so I'm just gonna tell you right at the gate now, I have seen effectively nothing that gives me any reason to believe that there is a remake or even a re-release happening anytime soon. It's not for a lack of will, but we'll get into my own theory in a second once we go over the basics for the people new to this situation. So about a year ago, one Zach Zweisen of Kotaku released an article that in so many words alleged that Hasbro wanted to re-release the Cybertron games, but that Activision Blizzard just straight up lost them. This cites an interview from a Transformers fan site, and that interview has now been updated saying that such claims were made in error. The Kotaku article is also updated because literally a day later, ActiBliz was like, what? No, we still have them. Our licensing deal just expired, so we can't sell them anymore. Because in case you didn't know, Activision's deal to make games based on Hasbro IPs expired in late 2017. But that leads us to a perplexing detail, which might lead some to think that these games are secretly about to be released. But unfortunately, what might be the real answer is a lot more cynical. So the other day, I was at the Kroger of all places, and before me was this little guy, the Transformers Studio Series Gamer Edition of Starscream. game. Huh, I thought. That's a little odd of a thing to release. And sure enough, later on at other stores, I saw other gamer editions of the Transformers Studio series popping up, like this one of Optimus Prime I snagged at GameStop, where they now sell everything but video games. Or at Target, I found this Sideswipe, and a lot of the guy who gets shot in the face by Megatron in the first minute of the game. Strange, isn't it? Not really, but we're building up to the answer here. Now, as you know, Transformers is having a big 40th anniversary party this year, and also I'm releasing this video because there's going to be a big tentpole event around Transformers 1 happening this weekend. There's been a lot of big announcements and a lot of big roadmaps being released, including one for shows and video games. Roadmaps that assure us that Transformers Reactivate is totally coming out next year, guys. We pinky promise for realsies this time. Bruh. I've been waiting on Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 since 2019. This ain't my first rodeo. But the one thing that was not listed anywhere in any of these roadmaps is anything to do with the Cybertron Trilogy. You know, if there was ever a time to talk about those, now would have been a really great time. Okay, time for me to stop yanking you around and explain my theory. And I assure you, all of these previously mentioned facts are relevant. Remember the Kotaku article? Well, the initial source it cited was an interview about those Studio Series Gamer Edition toys that Hasbro was recently releasing at the time, which are basically just all the Transformers from War for Cybertron. The interview itself dates back to mid-2023, and we haven't seen any of these guys in any iteration since late 2017, early 2018 when the games got pulled from digital storefronts, which is almost exactly 6 years ago. Okay, quick CYA, I am not an attorney, I cannot give legal opinions or offer legal advice, and nothing taken in this video or frankly anything I say should be considered as such. And this is also all guesswork here, as I do not have like omniscience, nor do I have access to all of Hasbro's like documents and contracts. So why is that period of time relevant? 6 years. Because in order to keep the trademark of something, you need to file an affidavit with the US Patent and Trademark Office between the 5th and 6th year of your initial filing or the last time you renewed. And part of that filing is that you must show proof that you are actively using your mark. Believe it or not, you are not allowed to just sit on your intellectual property and do nothing with it. Hasbro is probably very much aware of this because, fun fact, the reason why Shockwave never shows up in the Unicron trilogy of toy lines and shows is because they temporarily lost the rights to him. Now, back to that period of time since the Cybertron games got delisted. Oh, would you look at that? 5 years and change. Right on time to need something to show that yes, you are very much still using these specific IPs and would like to keep their trademarks. Also, on the note of the Netflix movie trilogy of the same name, I can't really give you exact information here, but in the US, there are 42 different kinds of trademarks, and I believe that movies and toys are separate lines of trademark. Trademark is very, very complicated. Just trust me on this. The interview that's cited in that Kotaku article talks about how in designing these new figures, they had to look at old CAD models and even the old games themselves for reference, which also might explain why these things' transformation sequences are so complicated since, well, like we said a while back, these guys don't so much just transform in-game as they just jump in the air and do a big flip to distract you from that. They just kind of morph into their vehicle forms. I wouldn't be surprised if whatever's going on between Activision and Hasbro is still going on, and that the team in charge of the series had to get creative to make the toys happen. Now, again, I cannot say any of this for 100% because I don't have all the information. I'm just making somewhat educated guesses based on what facts are available to me. I am also trying not to cloud my judgment by how much I want something, but I guess I'm pulling out a Shockwave here and thinking, okay, what is the most logical conclusion? You know, the more I think about it, the more I wonder if the Studio series as a whole was conceptualized as IP protection first and collector's items second, because it's a pretty effective way to avoid another Shockwave incident while also throwing a bone to older fans and collectors. Hell, I might just grab that Studio Series Armada Megatron they released last year since that one was my favorite as a kid. Now, referencing the interview again and the back of my box for the physical copies of the games, Hasbro owns the rights to the games and all the Transformers in them. That's nice and all, but what they don't own is High Moon. If I had to guess as to why the games haven't been re-released, it's because Hasbro and Activision are at some sort of impasse in negotiations. Because Hasbro can't make the games without Activision, and Activision isn't allowed to touch the games without Hasbro. Now, for the millionth time, I do not have any way of knowing any of this for certain, but maybe there's a clause in some third-party contract, like say whoever the contract is with for Reactivate, saying that they are the only ones allowed to make console and PC games for Transformers while the contract is active. Maybe it's the other way around, where if Activision is gonna make Transformers games, they want to be the only ones allowed to do it so they don't have to compete with anyone, which would be a problem because there are other people that they have agreements to make games with right now. There are few places more complicated than the intersection of intellectual property and contract law. Who knows though? Maybe we'll see the games re-released in another 5 or 6 years after current game projects are done. Maybe we'll see them sooner than that if some sort of miracle compromise is finally reached, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I'm sticking with the theory about IP limbo because this is not the first time something like this has happened in video games. System Shock, a series very near and dear to my heart, had a similar issue where for a period of time, one company had the copyrights to the games themselves, the other had the IP rights to the brand, and neither of those people were people that could or even wanted to make the games. This got resolved after Night Dive hustled to collect all the IP gems and snapped their fingers to remake System Shock, and at least tried to find some people to work on System Shock 3. Well, at least we get System Shock 2 Enhanced Edition one of these days. Whew, that was a big one. These games were a lot of fun, but like I just got done talking about, it's hard to play them, and I don't expect them to come to modern systems anytime soon. I at least had a pretty good time with them. I really wish I did have more to tell you about this, but really after giving it some proper due diligence, there's no reason to hold your breath, and unless you happen across one of these games at a used game store, you are SOL. I hope you enjoyed the video at least. My only remaining thoughts on this harken back to an offhand comment I made earlier in the video about how we are to Transformers what Tau are to Space Marines. I know it'll never happen, but a Transformers X40K crossover would be wild. Think about it. The AdMech might just splinter off from the Imperium or have a massive crisis of belief after seeing a Transformers Spark as essentially hard proof of machine spirits. The Autobots would have to reckon with how the dudes they are with now are not the cute little organics that got roped up into their civil war anymore, and these guys might just eclipse them in raw destructive capacity. Unicron as the physical manifestation of the fifth chaos god of hatred and avarice. Baneblade Megatron. Fuck all of the BS rationalization. You know what? This is all just because I have had the phrase Baneblade Megatron bouncing around in my head for a week now. I'd pay Imperial Knight prices for that. Hell, I might even pay Titan prices for that. Like I said, I have and totally plan on doing a video on Transformers Devastation in the future. I just need time to practice and get good at that game so I don't make a fool of myself, because it's basically Metal Gear Rising Decepticons. Heck, people literally take the models from Transformers Devastation and put them in MGR. I have no idea when that's going to be though, because Indieween is coming very soon. A few last minute things to remind you about before we go is one, if you think stuff like Grimlock is cool, there is a Kickstarter for a game called Athanasia, which is basically dinosaurs. And you'd be doing me a real solid if you at least checked it out and see what they were about. Also, these videos do take me a lot of time and a considerable bit of money to make, as I gotta go around searching for old used games and then do all the setup, and heck, I think I started this video in like September of last year. To help keep me going and make stuff like this possible, I do run a Patreon over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder, and while it's never necessary, if you're feeling like it, anything you can give helps me out a great deal. And thank you so much for all my patrons who do. Now let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it dancing, making skate videos, or drawing in a sketchbook, what you do is not content. It is art. Content is a word that in recent years has been twisted into meaning a means to grind up all your skills, passions, and ambitions into a gray sludge that is meant for nothing more than to make a line go up. Art is sacred. Art is a reflection of its creator by the very nature of its creation, and in no way do you deserve to be ground up into sludge. So get out there and fight against the contentification of everything by fighting for your art. Stay saucy, everyone. Frisk, what I have put before you is Starscream. Don't worry, he's still in the box. I don't think you're looking to be betrayed anytime soon. Ooh, big yawn. So far, this has gone pretty well. He has not chosen violence. Ooh, I missed a big stretch. Oh, you just going back to your sitting spot? It's okay. You're allowed to go to the sitting spot. I am amazed I found this. It's just, I wasn't expecting to find it. I knew that the Hasbro was starting to re-release older lines. Like, I had my eye on the Unicron Trilogy Megatron was like the cool beetle horns, which they re-released and made better. But I wasn't even at like a toy store or anywhere when I found this. Was at the grocery store for some reason. What were you doing in a grocery store? Frisk, do you have answers to this? Of course you don't. There's no thoughts in this head. Okay, I earned that.